In July this year, I had a new book published called Setting God Free, Moving Beyond the Caricature We've Created in Our Own Image. And for the month of November, the book is divided into 4 parts. The first part is Setting Psychology Free. The second part is Setting God Free. The third part is Setting Spirituality Free. And the fourth part was Setting Science Free. So for the month of November, I focused on setting psychology free, and I talked about the importance of a personal cosmology based on epistemology and ontology. And I took a break during the month of December in order to focus on the Christmas story. And so for January, I want to go back to the book, and I want to look at the second part of the book, Setting God Free. And since there are 5 Sundays in January, I'm going to change the order slightly for myself. So I'm going to put God on trial for the month of January. So today I'm going to talk about the prosecution's case for God being guilty of crimes against humanity. And then next Sunday and the Sunday afterwards, I'll talk about the defense of God. Then the 4th Sunday is the community mass. And for the 5th Sunday, I will do the recap of the case, followed by Q&A. So today I'm going to focus on, the prosecution's case. And the reading I've chosen was the prosecutor's summary at the end of his case, his summary of the case they're bringing against Yahweh. And the prosecutor I've called Michael Newsom. Michael Newsom walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, leaving his notes at the lectern, and spoke from memory the details of the case of his career. Not counting those killed in the flood, or the death of the Egyptian firstborns, or the victims of other spats where he didn't take time out to count the corpses, God, according to his own admission, killed 2,821,364 humans. When you extrapolate from the other mentioned but uncounted slaughters, a conservative estimate of his total killing is around 25 million people. Not to mention the slaughter of untold billions of livestock and wild animals. And how many people, according to the Bible, did Satan kill? 10. The 7 sons and 3 daughters of Job. And this was the result of a bet between Yahweh and Satan to test Job's fidelity to God. Instead of using the phrase, "the devil made me do it," as an excuse for antisocial behavior, wouldn't it be far more accurate to say, "the Bible made me do it"? In fact, wasn't that the pretext and the inspiration for the Crusades, the Inquisition, and the Conquistadores? Michael Newsom blurted, unable to contain his own commentary on the subject. Now, add to that slaughter his inciting of the chosen people to imitate his brutal behavior. Then factor in his wholesale slaughter of animals and add in his pathological profile and his pathetic record on keeping contracts, and you have a cosmic psychopath masquerading as our compassionate, albeit partisan, creator. How can we explain our craven obedience to this monster? It has all the hallmarks of the Stockholm Syndrome, or the Patty Hearst subpersonality. How often have we witnessed Hindu gurus, Buddhist Rinpoches, and Christian televangelists abuse their devotees sexually and financially, while purporting to offer them samadhi, nirvana, or heaven? The followers are forced to resolve the cognitive dissonance between what they observe of the teacher's behavior and what these masters claim by subduing common sense, intelligence, and a moral code to the overriding demands of the ego's fascination with self-proclaimed wonder workers. What excuses have Judeo-Christians offered for God's egregious behavior? The excuses are as follows. Firstly, he is God. Who are we to question his judgments? That was Yahweh's final put-down of Job's attempts to seek justice, or even a sensible explanation for his own mistreatment. Secondly, devotees will claim, Other tribes and religions committed the same kinds of slaughter back then. In fact, it has happened through all of human history, right up to our own times in Hitler's Germany, Pol Pot's Cambodia, the Armenian genocide, and the mass murder of the Tutsi people in Zaire. All this is true. But these criminals did it on behalf of what Judeo-Christianity would claim are false gods, or for purely political reasons. The Bible, on the other hand, says that Yahweh's actions and Israel's imitation of them were done by and at the instructions of the one true God for spiritual reasons. And he is still being worshipped by 2.2 billion people as of 2010. So, dear readers, jurors, you don't have to be a Supreme Court justice or a rocket scientist to appreciate the indisputable guilt of this God. I wouldn't expect your deliberations to last for even an hour in order for you to return a verdict of guilty on all counts. Thank you, judge and jury. I rest my case. So for the next 3 Sundays, I'm going to put God on trial for crimes against humanity. Today, I'm going to present the case for the prosecution. And then for the next 2 Sundays, I'm going to present the case for the defense. And on the 5th Sunday of the month, God willing, I'll do a recap of the entire case and open it up to Q&A. So today, I'm going to focus completely on the prosecution case. And as I did in the book, I'm going to present briefly 3 expert witnesses. The first one will be a Bible scholar who will work us through the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then I'm going to bring in a clinical psychologist to try to psychoanalyze this God. And thirdly, a contract lawyer to look at how God broke the covenant on diverse occasions. So let me begin then just by introducing the topic. Judeo-Christianity has a huge problem. It's the problem of God's pathology. This is a narcissistic psychopath, if ever there were one. And so there's a euphemism that's used by church people, you know, in skipping over these passages. They call them the difficult passages. And it's very unusual. You're not going to hear many of these, you know, on Sunday Mass. You know, when you open your lectionary for Sunday Mass, most of these passages will never be mentioned. And so for a lot of Christians, you know, who haven't read the Bible, they're probably unaware of this reality. And for people who do read the Bible, they somehow manage to skip over these pieces and not process them adequately. So there's this euphemism that scholars use. They call these the difficult passages. And what have been the results, the historical results of these difficult passages? The first one is that religion has shot itself in the foot by including these as scriptural. The second thing is that this all-loving, the true all-loving God has been reduced to a hateful monster. Thirdly, this fictional caricature, you know, has had generations of Judeo-Christians cowering in fear of eternal damnation, that they're going to be sent to hell. Fourthly, innocent people have been dragged before inquisitions, have been tortured, and have been killed, you know, on the basis of using this as a pretext. Fifthly, God's behavior allegedly has been the justification for every manner of human evil, up to and including the notion of slavery. That God not only allowed slavery, he mandated slavery. And finally, the final result was that when it was safe to do so, millions of people escaped into agnosticism or even atheism because there was no way they could accept this God. So rather than accept this God, they became totally atheists and believed there is no God. And for those who remained within the fold, who somehow decided to stay part of the system, what were the excuses and what were the responses that we made? The first one is, shh, don't anger him. You could be next. So we're afraid even to think about these things or to speak about these things. Instead, in case God notices you and what you're saying and doing and whacks you as well. The second kind of an excuse is, he's God. How dare you question his behavior or his motives? And this was the actual put down in the book of Job, which was written about the year 550 BCE. when the last two tribes of Israel were in Babylon, in exile in Babylon. And there's Job trying to kind of ask God why he's been punished as badly as he's been punished. And that was God's final answer. Were you there when I created the heavens and the earth? How dare you question me? So that's the second kind of put down. The third kind of excuse we make is he's God. He has reasons that we can't even begin to fathom. And unfortunately, this is the refuge of so many priests, particularly Catholic priests. You know, when little kids in catechism class raise their hands and ask their questions. You know, God has his reasons. You know, God is infinite. God is all powerful. God is almighty. So we can't question his reasons. So don't ask those kinds of questions because we can't understand the mind of God. And then the most vicious of all, and this is that the excuse that obviously the people he killed were bad people and deserved to die. And this is still the viewpoint of many fundamentalist Christians, even today, believe that when you look through the Bible and you look at all the people whom God murdered, and the response of fundamentalist Christianity is they obviously deserved it. They deserved to die. So God wouldn't have done it if it weren't just. Now, this is the mindset that I grew up with as a Catholic, and most of you grew up with as Catholics or Christians. I don't like these results. I don't like these excuses, you know. And so I set out as a young priest to try to find my own understanding of these stories in the Bible. So I tried to create my own cosmology. I tried to unpack the Bible stories to find out who this God really is. And the fruit of my, 50 years of priesthood was a book that I published called Setting God Free, Moving Beyond the Caricature We've Created in Our Own Image. And so let me get into the prosecution. I set up then this court case with a prosecution and a defense. And I called 3 expert witnesses in the prosecution. The first was a Bible scholar. The second one was a clinical psychologist. And the third one was a contract lawyer. So let me look very, very briefly then at what the Bible scholar had to say as he walked us through the first 5 books, particularly the Pentateuch. And obviously, I'm going to have to try to reduce 250 pages of the book devoted to the trial to just a few remarks. So I'm going to look first at the individual murders that God is guilty of when you read through these accounts. The first one was that when Cain killed his brother Abel, and God put a mark on Cain, and Cain objected and says, whoever sees me now is going to kill me. Now, this is interesting because there are only 3 people on planet Earth at this stage: Adam, Eve, and Cain. He's killed his brother. So who's he afraid is going to kill him? His dad? His mother? And God makes a very interesting remark. God says, not so. Anybody who kills Cain, I will demand 7 murders in recompense. Now, who are the people he's going to kill? They haven't been created yet, but God's going to create them and then kill them if they take issue with Cain. So that's the first threat of God to commit murders. He kills Lot's wife, literally for being curious and looking back at the burning of Sodom and Gomorrah. He turned her into a pillar of salt. After he had asked Moses to go back into Egypt to set his people free, he tried to kill Moses on the way back because Moses hadn't circumcised his 2 young sons. And only his wife's intervention, and his wife wasn't Jewish. She was a Midianite. She was the daughter of the priest of Midian, a guy called Jethro. And she had to immediately circumcise the 2 boys in order to stop God from killing Moses. When they escaped from Egypt, the first high priest is Aaron. And God ordains 2 of Aaron's sons to be priests as well, a guy called Nadab and a guy called Abihu. And the very day after their ordination, they're conducting a liturgy, and they make a mistake in the liturgy, and God kills both of them. And the father, Aaron, is looking there shocked. And God says, don't even cry. If you cry, I'll kill you too. So Aaron has to get 2 of his uncles, and they have to schlep the 2 dead bodies outside the camp. And Aaron is afraid to grieve for his 2 dead sons. At the very end of the trip across the desert, alleged trip across the desert after 40 years, God leaves Aaron to die naked on a foreign mountain, a place called Mount Hor. He won't allow Aaron to go into the promised land. And so he strips him of his garments, and he gives his priestly robes to another son of his, and Aaron is left to die on his own, naked on the mountaintop. When it comes to the actual crossing into the promised land, Moses asked, please let me go and see it just for myself. And God says, no, I'll take you to the top of a mountain. I'll show you where it is, but you're not going to get in there because you were disobedient to me on one occasion. And he takes Moses up to the top of Mount Nebo, and he shows Moses the entire land of Israel. And then Moses dies on the top of another mountain, and his body is never found. Nobody knows where Moses is actually buried. If I were to synopsize all the personal killings that God is responsible for in those 5 books, here's a very small partial list. Here are the reasons for which he killed people. 1, they didn't listen to the priest, so they're going to be killed. Witches have to be killed. Homosexuals have to be killed. Fortune tellers have to be killed. Anybody who curses a parent has to be killed. Anybody who strikes a parent has to be killed. Anybody who commits fornication has to be killed. Anybody who commits adultery has to be killed. Followers of other religions have to be killed. Non-believers have to be killed. Blasphemers have to be killed. Women who are not virgins on their wedding night have to be killed. And anybody found working on the Sabbath has to be killed. That was the individual murders. Then you look at mass murders of his own people, times when he wiped out whole swipes of his own chosen people. When Moses went up the mountain to get the 10 commandments, he was missing for 40 days. And the people says, you know, he's dead. Yeah, give us back the old gods, the gods who actually took us out of Egypt. And they fashion a golden calf and they're dancing around this golden calf. And when Moses comes down and see what's happened, God killed 3,000 people for dancing naked around the golden calf. According to the scriptures, 603,550 foot soldiers left Egypt during the Exodus. 603,350 Israelite soldiers, so guys between the age of 20 and 60. So there's probably another 1.5 million people with them, all of the women, the older people, the young children. And God at some stage gets so mad with them that he says, of the 603,550 people, soldiers who left Egypt, only 2 of them will actually get into the promised land, Caleb and Joshua. And so you literally have 603,548 dead bodies in the Sinai desert, military men, not to mention the women and children who died as well. On one occasion during this Exodus, there's a rebellion against Aaron and Moses. So God kills all the rebels. And the onlookers are shocked by what God has just done, and they start complaining. So God kills 14,700 more of the complainers for complaining. At one stage, he's feeding them with manna from heaven, and they get bored of the diet. They want to go back to Egypt where they had much better food. And so God sends a particular kind of serpent called the Sarah Serpent, and it kills uncounted numbers by snake bite. So that were like the mass murders of his own people. What about his mass murdering of other people's? He killed all the firstborn of the Egyptian families. And by my estimate, that was probably somewhere around 200,000 people. In one single night, he killed 200,000 Egyptians. Then when the Israelites escaped and the Pharaoh's army tried to follow them, he drowned the Egyptian army in the Red Sea. On one occasion, they're in a battle against the Amorites in the desert, and God boasts, so Joshua is the leader, the military leader of the Israelite troops. God boasts that he killed more with hailstones than Joshua killed with the sword. So God sent down hailstones to kill the Amorites and boasts that he killed more with the hailstones than Joshua had managed to kill with the sword. And on another occasion, in another battle, when Joshua was fighting, God held the sun in place for extra hours to give Joshua more time to continue with the slaughter. Another occasion, God killed 10,000 Moabites. Now wait for this one. According to the second book of Chronicles in chapter 14, God says that he killed 1 million. Yes, you hear it correctly. God killed 1 million Ethiopians, according to Second Chronicles chapter 14. And another occasion, the Arameans, another tribe of people, insulted Yahweh by claiming that Yahweh was merely a God of the hills, but not a God of the valleys. And God got so bent out of shape that he killed 100,000 of them. And when the survivors escaped to the city of Aphek, he made the wall of the city collapse, and he killed another 27,000 of them. So that's what he did to the other peoples. How about genocides? In the famous flood story, I don't know what the population of planet Earth was like at that stage, but only 8 human beings survived. Noah and his wife and their 3 sons and the sons' wives. Everybody else got wiped out. And then as the Israelites are marching across the desert to the promised land, he told them to exercise what is called the ban. And there were 2 forms of the ban. If they were passing through a territory and they came across a city, but they didn't intend to settle there, they were mandated to kill all of the men in the city. But they could spare the women, the children, and the livestock and keep those as booty for themselves. If they came to a city that they wanted to conquer and they intended settling in that city, then they had to kill literally everything that breathed. God created by breathing into Adam and Eve originally. So everything that breathed, literally all mammals had to be exterminated. Men, women, children, the elderly, and all kinds of livestock, if they intended to settle in that city. And then finally, the biblical scholar talked about, animal slaughter. God mandated non-stop ritual animal sacrifice of birds, goats, sheep, and cattle. When? Every morning, every evening, on the Sabbath, at the New Moon Festival, at Passover, at Pentecost, on New Year's Day, on the Day of Atonement, and on the Feast of Booths. Non-stop animal slaughter. So this is what it looks like, his record around killing. Then I introduced a clinical psychologist to do a kind of a mental status examination of this character. And using the DSM, this is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the Bible of psychologists and psychiatrists. It's a 1,000-page book talking about all possible mental disorders from infancy right to senility. And I went through it and I identified at least 10 categories which God would really fit. Obviously, I'd have to have him as a client. I'd have to do one-on-one counseling before I can make a more accurate diagnosis of him. But in the meantime, this God has all the worst human characteristics: regret, anger, revenge, jealousy, insecurity. And he alternates constantly between a kind of a depressive paranoia about being jilted by the Israelites in favor of other gods, and a manic euphoria generated by his own constant self-praise and boasting. He's oscillating constantly. So he obviously has a bipolar condition where he's going from deep depression to mania. So I looked at about 10 different possible categories. He definitely has a narcissistic personality disorder. He definitely has borderline personality disorder. He has notions of grandiosity. He thinks he's God. And so I outlined about 10 different categories that would adequately cover the psychology of this psychopath. So briefly, that's what I just want to say about the clinical psychologist today. And then I called in a contract lawyer, because God is always claiming that the Israelites broke the covenant he made with them. So I wanted her to examine the actual contracts and who broke them, how frequently. And the contract was originally, the covenant was between God and Adam and Eve, and presumably all of their progeny, which would mean us. It'd mean every single human being that ever lived. And so the first covenant was with all the human species. Soon God changed his mind. And now he wiped out everybody except 8 people. And now he decided to make a new covenant. The second covenant you find is the covenant he made with Noah. And in that covenant, on 6 different occasions, in that one chapter, he says, this is the covenant I make between me and all living beings. It's a covenant not just even with human beings anymore. He's expanding it in his great largesse. It's going to be with the descendants of Noah, which is all of us, and all living beings. So when he changes his mind and he decides that it's only with human beings, he's not going to make a covenant anymore with the animal kingdom, and so you're free to kill them now. Before then, humans were vegetarian. Now they're allowed to kill the animals. So having saved all these animals in the ark, he's now going to slaughter them. Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Shem is allegedly the father of the Semitic peoples. Ham is the father of the African nations, and Japheth is the father of the Caucasian peoples. So presumably the covenant with all 3. But no, God changes his mind again and decides he's not going to make it with Japheth and he's not going to make it with Ham. He's only going to make it with the Semites, with the sons of Shem. So now it's only Shem, all the Semitic peoples. Fast forward a few thousand years, and of all the descendants of Shem, he decides he's only going to choose one of them, a guy called Avraham. All of the other Semites are out, no longer part of the contract. The contract now is only with Shem and his descendants, and with Abraham and his descendants. Abraham has two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Now, Ishmael is actually his firstborn son, but it's the son by a slave girl. And God decides he's not going to make the covenant with the slave girl's son. He's going to make it with the secondborn, who's Isaac. And so the slave girl is sent off into the desert with her child. Soon, Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. And Esau is the firstborn, Jacob is the younger. But their mother, Rebecca, conspires because at this stage, the father, Isaac, has gone completely blind and he can't distinguish between the two sons. And so Jacob comes in and he steals the blessing from his older brother, who's out hunting to get game to feed his own father. And he lies barefacedly with the connivance of his mother, Rebecca, and persuades Isaac that he indeed is Esau instead of Jacob. So Isaac gives him his blessing. Esau comes back to find out that he's being jilted. Now the contract and the covenant is only going to be with Jacob and his progeny. But it seems that God was incapable of protecting the progeny. So Jacob had 12 sons. 10 of them are finally wiped out in the Assyrian capture of the 10 northern tribes of Israel in the year 722 BC. They're never heard of again. There are only two tribes left, Benjamin and Judah. And in the year 550 BCE, the last two tribes are taken into exile in Babylon. And now God makes his contract only with Judah, with the Jewish nation. And of course, we know that Christians claim that he took the covenant away from the Jews when they rejected Jesus, and now he made the covenant with us, the Christians. And then after about another 600 years came the Muslims, and they claim, no, he's rejected the Christians at this stage. The covenant is with us, Muslims. And today on planet Earth, there are 4,300 religions, many of whom are claiming they're the only ones with whom God has made the covenant. And so this contract law goes through this. It shows how God has continually broken his promises to us. So that was, in summary, the prosecution's case. So what do I want to say about it? You've noticed that for the first time ever, I haven't begun a homily by telling a story. I always introduce my homily by telling a story. And the reason is I want to end the homily with a story today. And it's a story about the Stockholm Syndrome. I'm sure you've heard the term. A Stockholm Syndrome means a situation in which hostages develop a psychological bond with their captors during captivity. So people who are captured in some situation, in order to survive psychologically, they have to somehow bond with their captors in order to survive. And this case from which the name comes happened in 1973 in Stockholm, in Sweden, when four people were taken hostages during a bank robbery, and the captors held them captive for a long period of time. And finally, the police busted in and set them free. And what happened was the captives had bonded with the captors during the captivity. Now, you can say that was just to survive, psychology, a kind of a defense mechanism in order to survive. But the extraordinary thing is the four hostages refused to give witness against their captors subsequently. Now, why was this? Was it because they had bonded with them? Or was it because what came out subsequently was that the police had had little care for the hostages? When they busted in, they could care less about the hostages, and they put them in grave danger in order to capture the bad guys. And the hostages were so upset with how the police handled the situation that they refused to give testimony against their own captors. Now, I want to unpack that as my final point this morning. What does this have to do with the prosecution of Yahweh? And has this to do? Why would we follow this psychopath God if we really were familiar with the Bible and had read these passages? How in God's name could we continue to be devotees of this God? Because it seems that those who wanted to rescue us from this God were worse than the God himself. Who attempted to rescue us? Atheists. So we have a choice between following this very dysfunctional pathological God or handing over to atheists who tell us that life is utterly meaningless. There is no such thing as consciousness. There is no divine loving God in the sky. And it's almost as if the pathological God of the scriptures is preferable to the atheists, the ones who want to set us free. So there's my case for the prosecution today. Next Sunday, God willing, I'll pick up on the defense and show you the other side of the story. Namaste.